Welcome everyone to our panel on data governance. We have a very distinguished panel here today with a lot of great insights to share with you. My name is Wayne Eckerson. I'm president of Eckerson Group, a research and consulting firm that focuses explicitly on data and analytics. I've been in this field for 30 years almost, written a couple books, lots of reports, and consulted with lots of organizations around the world on data governance and data strategy and self-service analytics, among other things. So very happy to be with you today. Our topic is data governance, and perhaps most of you know that data governance is hard. It's like wrestling a greased pig. Very hard to do, and it's why a lot of organizations don't do it very well. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, people don't like to be governed in general. And it's very hard to get business people to a data governance meeting. They don't quite see the value, the immediate value to themselves, unless they are feeling the pain from a lack of data governance. Hopefully we can start to implement data governance before we feel that pain, because then things have gotten pretty chaotic. The other reason data governance is hard is because we've got some polar opposite forces working. One is the need to control data, but the other is the need to empower people and open data up. So how we balance the control and empowerment is really the essence of data governance, and why it makes it a fascinating area for me and our panelists. Now, before we start, I'm going to have each of them introduce themselves as they answer our first question. We have to ask ourselves, what is data governance? I've been in the field for a long time, as I mentioned, and I've come to realize that when people talk about data governance, it's usually many different things to different people. So you have to understand where they're coming from. It could be metadata management, data cataloging, data standards and definitions. It could be data quality, it could be master data management, or something else entirely, privacy and access control, data security. So I'd like to ask our panelists before we start, what is your definition of data governance, or what do you focus on among all those disciplines that I just mentioned? So maybe Dave, you can kick us off.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Dave Luna. I work for CA USA. We design and build flight simulators, ground simulators, all kinds of training devices. My formal training is in systems engineering. I've, for 30 years now, have designed and built flight simulators and some of our most complex programs. So our company is doing the transition that a lot of companies are to a digitally driven organization. So the company asked me to take a lot of my domain experience on how we actually execute our programs, and then my technical background. And I'm now the major Domo for our company. We have two of them. And I'm taking that expertise and trying to apply it to what does our data say about how we do business, and then transition us to that data-driven organization. Now, in that vein, some of the first things we encountered was data quality. So for me, for data governance, I had to start with a focus on data quality. Why? Well, because we spent so much time looking at that chart doesn't really reflect what I think the truth actually is. And we would go back to, is the source right? Is the flow right? Are we answering the right question? Well, the first iteration for everybody on their transition to a data path forward is your data quality good? So everybody loves things like a free text field that gives you so much power, and it's so dangerous if you have no controls, no definition, no monitoring of it. So my focus on data governance really had to start with quality, cleaning up the data and making sure it was good quality data before we could even start to say, my data's got to be right before I can say, is it telling me the right thing? So we focused on data quality at the beginning, and it's still a point of emphasis for me as far as data governance goes.
Great. So data quality for Dave, that's his emphasis for data governance. Kelsey, what about you?
Yeah, hi guys. I'm Kelsey McMahon. I'm a manager of marketing analytics for CME Group. I'm based in Chicago. I actually started my career in accounting, weaseled my way into BI, and now somehow have landed graciously into the data governance role. Our definition, and although I do agree with Dave, our definition and where we've started our journey with data governance is really around definitions and naming conventions. Once you have those things in place, it's easy to find the data. You're not duplicating data. You're not duplicating ETLs and wasting time on API calls. So that's really where we focused our journey and the start of our journey for data governance.
All right, so we got one vote for data quality, one vote for data definitions. Ben, what about you?
I'm not voting for either of those two things, but I will add to the breadth of this definition. My name is Ben Shine. I have the honor to serve as Vice President of Data Curiosity here at Domo, where I get to work with lots of wonderful customers like Kelsey and Dave. I've been here for almost 3 years, and prior to that, I was actually a Domo customer and worked at Target for 10 years. So bring sort of both of those experiences here. So I think that the last piece that I would add around data governance is sort of this idea of access control. It's like who has access to what, but really more with the lens towards empowering people, not sort of keeping people out, right? Not being a gatekeeper, being a shopkeeper to let them in and make sure they can securely do all those pieces. And I would say also that all of it, but certainly the access is also reflective of your strategy, right? If your access is limiting how people can engage with data in a way that is counter to your business strategy, it's very dangerous. And one of the things I always remember at Target was, as early on, we were sort of talking a lot about omni-channel, and all of our executives were, out on the street talking about it. My digital analytics team was constantly being told they can't have access to store data, right? So like your mouth and your strategy was saying omni-channel, store and digital, but the access, the governance. So governance needs to be strategy, and a big piece of that is what you have access to responsibly, in addition to quality and definition.
All right, those are three great answers, three great definitions of data governance. And there's others, as I mentioned. A lot of people today think of it as synonymous with data discovery and data cataloging and metadata management and other things. But let's move on. So each of you have had a lot of experience with data governance. Perhaps we can help our audience best if you could paint a before and after picture. What did your organization look like before you implemented some form of data governance, and what did it look like after you did that? So who wants to go first? Dave, how about you?
I'll take that one. So before we get back to data quality and all that. So first of all, I'd like to say there is no such thing as a done for data governance. There's a before and where we are now. So before, we had the continual question of, I'm not sure that's right. I'm going to go back to my Excel spreadsheet because that's what I've been using for 20 years. So getting that quality right, getting the information right. So before, it was always everyone questioning every chart, every card, every graph. Are you sure that's right? I actually know that person traveled, and you're not saying he traveled in this chart, and finding all those errors. So before, no one ever wanted to talk about what did the data tell me. They were always questioning, where did this data come from? And I don't think it's right. You need to prove that to me first. That was the first conversation with anything related to data before we incorporated some kind of data governance. Now that we've got a pretty good foundation of cleaning up that first, second, third pass through the quality of the data, the connections, and the relationships, now we're starting to get a little bit of the after effect of, well, that's pretty good information, but can you also tell me this, and can you also tell me that? So we're starting to get beyond the questioning of the quality of the data, the questioning of the truthfulness of the data, and getting more to the, well, thank you for telling me that. Well, what else can you tell me? What other information is hiding between the weeds? So we've really transitioned from skepticism of the data. Is it right? What does it mean? To what else can you tell me, and what else can I build? And sometimes, it's a double-edged sword. Now you get lots of requests for lots of new perspectives and lots of new information. As you get that buy-in that they trust your data, all of a sudden it's a new source of information. So we've gone from the, I don't trust it every time you show it to somebody, to what else can you give me every time you show it to somebody? So it really matters that we've implemented the data governance and gotten past the quality issues.
So the data quality helped kickstart what I'm hearing is a culture of analytics where people want more information.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now, do you have a sense of how much time you chewed up validating everybody's reports against something else?
More than I want to try and quantify, but yes, I could probably quantify it.
Yeah.
Just the understanding that it takes time to do that. So in today's day and age, people would turn around and say, can you now give me the perspective from this tool that we just connected? I'm like, well, hold on a second. You've got to give me the time to do the validation, do the cleanup, and make sure it's okay before we start using it. So the understanding, the literacy that you just can't throw raw data in the tool and get an answer, that's starting to be realized throughout the company.
Great. Kelsey, what about you? Can you paint a before and after picture for us?
Dave, I am where you were, and I am not envious of that. I just spent a day, at least this last week, validating the data. Just that trust, of gaining that trust, is kind of where we are at right now in our journey of understanding and trusting that governance, that it's actually working. And before we even got here, because even here is a ton of progress for us, right? Like, the fact that we're here and we're having the conversation of, do you trust it or don't you trust it, is light years from where we were even before, but I cannot wait to get where you are. But really, before this, we didn't have Domo or those cool cards that tell you an ETL didn't run, or here's the definition, or here's the standard piece of information that you're using. So we really had to kind of battle that word of mouth, kind of, oh, I know you did this yesterday in an Excel spreadsheet. What did you use? How did you do it? How should I calculate it in mine? What system did you get it from? So Domo really, for us, has become that source of truth of calculations and understanding that the data is trustworthy, but now it's getting our users on board for that trusting of the data. And, it's a journey. And like I said, we're here, we're farther than we were yesterday, and tomorrow will be better. So just trying to gain that trust.
Excellent. Excellent. Ben, how about you?
Yeah, I think the before state, there's a couple emotions that I think about, actually. And I often talk about how I think data is actually a very emotional thing, and maybe data governance is part data therapy in a lot of ways, right? I think that in the before, there's a lot of fear, right? Like, there is fear that maybe you're looking at something incorrectly or it's not right. There's fear that you're going to get caught because you're looking at something that you need, but you're not supposed to, right? Because there's that imbalance between what you have access to and what you need to actually get your job done. And so you're sort of sneaking around, or you're exporting it to Excel or whatever. And so I think there is a big piece of it that is, how do you mitigate that fear? How do you make it so that people have this confidence to explore, right? But know that they're doing it responsibly, know they're not going to get in trouble if they're not looking at something incorrectly because of governance and definitions and all those things. I also think in the before, you spend a lot of time, and I think both Dave and Kelsey touch on this, sort of arguing about the data, right? You're not, the point of the data is not in and of itself. The point of the data is to drive your business. But I think we've all been in those places where you start a meeting, you spend most of it arguing about the data. You have another meeting to follow up to align on the data. And then after that, maybe you have a meeting to explain how you aligned to the data. And then you can actually get to what is this data telling us about the business? And so if you can use governance and just being smart about it to sort of condense all that, so you come to the meeting agreeing on the data, and now let's have a conversation. There's a lot of goodness that can come from an organization when you get rid of that fear and when you do those things.
So we're getting a few questions on the chat, which is great. I encourage the audience to send their questions in. One question was, what tools and platforms are you using to help manage your data governance framework? Kelsey, you mentioned, I think you're using Domo, and I would think that most people here are. Is there any other option that we can tell our audience?
So we've here at CAE, we're right now focusing on Domo. We use Domo for the reporting, Domo for the collection and the cleanup and all that. We've tried a couple different other tools. I'm not going to put names up and start bashing them, but we found that it's easiest to keep it all centralized, keep it in one place. So we pull it in, we clean it, and we distribute it all from Domo right now.
Excellent. Okay, so let's move on. The questions are coming in fast and furious now, but let's move on to my next question, which is, what techniques have you used to get momentum for your data governance program? Where have you started? Did you start with a charter and get people on board that way, or did you just start rolling your sleeves up and fixing errors, or something in between?
Yeah, no, I can jump in. You know, I think there's a few things, and look, obviously, yes, you need to know what you're doing, but in terms of a charter and things like that. But I think ultimately, it's if you have clarity in your business strategy, that's the starting point. I think some of the tactics that I've seen, one is keep it easy, right? People don't want to have to jump through a million hoops, whether it's extra approvals or whatever it, or go here, click here, wait for this approval to get the data, right? So the more that you can leverage existing infrastructure, especially now, right? You have single sign-on, two-factor authentication, all this infrastructure that's already been created. So if you can use that to one, make sure it's secure, and then two, inherit who is this person and what else do they need to do. They don't need to have another login. They don't have to remember that they have to go apply for special access if they want the store manager view versus whatever. So I think that's a big piece of it, right? If you can make it easy and aligned with what they need to do, that's going to work. I think the other thing is, and I might get some jokes or be made fun of, is that you have to make governance fun, right? It can't just be, we talked about like no one wants to come. So whether that's having a governance pizza party or having a competition about cleaning up data, or, having a hackathon with, Starbucks gift cards or whatever, like all those are things that you need to try those different approaches so that people are encouraged to do it and can start seeing maybe both that it could be fun or they could get a little reward, but also help, drive the governance mission forward as well.
Right, right. I think our mission really is to create that culture of governance to support the culture of analytics. We got a great question that came in that's related is, has anyone tied employee incentives to data governance to help ensure data is populated correctly and consistently?
Well, that's actually one of my big things that I said was a learning from this was, yes, I had that pit in my stomach. Oh my gosh, I broke something. Oh Lord, what have I done feeling? And if anyone hasn't had that feeling, be thankful for it. If you have had it, you know the feeling I'm talking about and you know why governance is so important. And if that does not make you roll up your sleeves and start going, I don't know what will. But really focusing on like making sure that governance is a part of every single person on that team's goals throughout the year really drives that forward for us. Like that was a huge thing for us, a huge step forward to make sure that people understood that this is a goal and that we are striving towards it, so that when you come to write your review at the end of the year, you can say, this is what I contributed. I cleaned up 70 data sets that weren't used anymore. I renamed all of my naming conventions. I hope it's not 70, but some days it is, So, but that was big for us to include that in your goals to make sure that people are invested. Because like we said, we can make governance as fun as we can, right? As with pizza parties, gift cards, but actually executing it is like another story.
So for you, Kelsey, it sounds like you start with the stick or the fear of screwing up, right? And then end with the carrot, which is, the having goals. And I'm wondering if anyone's written or thought about incorporating governance into OKRs, if they even have that. That's objectives and key results. It's kind of like an ongoing performance self-evaluation. Does that resonate with anyone?
Yes. So some of the things we've done here at CAE. So when you talk about, I see some of the other questions about just how many people are organizing all the data governance and all that. So we have two major domos here at CAE, and I got to give a shout out to Ashley, my co-domo, major domo here. And we really actually have the two of us that are managing data governance. And we actually try and automate it as much as possible. So you get all these different techniques and all that. We hear how much work does it take. So what you want to try and do is build it into the system, build it into Domo. So we do the metrics on how many orphan cards do we have, how many orphan data sets do we have. We use a lot of Domo alerts. But some of the techniques we've used is basically to automate it. You always put your error checks in, your data quality checks. Am I accidentally producing duplicates? Do I have stale users, stale cards? You put that all in as alerts. So basically Domo will tell you when something's wrong. So you don't have somebody that's constantly evaluating the system. The system is evaluating itself and shouting at you. And if you think your data flow is perfect today and it's meeting all the rules and everything, well, that's wonderful. Put your checks in there anyway. That's a great technique, because when the source data changes and somebody changed the name of a field that you're ingesting, the validity checks you put in there will fire off the alerts that all of a sudden you can't map something. So we have everything from data quality checks on the fields to alerts and reporting when a flow doesn't run, and that pops into the people who are managing it. So right now we're kind of a victim of our own success. We've only got 2 people managing it, but it's growing exponentially. And we try and do it through automation, automatic monitoring of data governance, and fires off actions to us to take care of.
So Dave, 2 people in your data governance program office, as we say. Do you have a bunch of stewards as well and data
Yes.
owners?
So right now we've got about 400 users actively in Domo between the US instance and an international instance. For power users, we probably got on the order of 15 to 20. Now, when you talk about what we're going to call the super users, the people that can go in there, look at somebody's stuff, figure out why it's broken and fix it and make sure it's right, there's probably 4 or 5 of us. And we actually, like I just said, are a victim of our own success. So we are currently documenting what we're doing and how we're doing it and where we think we need to be in the next year or 2. So our leadership can actually evaluate what we've done and determine how much they're going to invest going forward. And it's a double-edged sword. Like I said, you're never finished with data governance. So you say, I wish I was where you were at. We're in the middle of the journey and we're into another layer of the onion, and we'll keep moving forward.
So Kelsey and Ben, what could you describe your data governance organization, Ben, when you were at Target, perhaps?
Yeah,
How
well,
many
I think so.
people-
I know I have some former Target team members of mine on here too asking questions. So they might tell you that someone leaves their organization and dumps a bunch of messy data on them named Ben Shine, and then they have to deal with all of it. We can unmute Chad McCormick there. No, I think a lot of it is, a lot of it is what Dave said, right? It is a journey. It has to be a constant evolution. I think a lot of what works, and I often talk about, you have to set up the rituals that allow for these things to happen, right? So obviously, like Dave said, like you need to automate things. You want to have logic. We have some customers now using data science to identify potential PII information so that they're alerted if someone added data that maybe shouldn't be there or hasn't been secured. So there's lots of awesome ways to automate, but also sometimes it just comes down to those human interactions, right? Do you have, regular meetings of a governance council or an analytics council? Do you have, a chat room or whatever chat platform is the du jour at your organization, to be able to talk about these things and communicate and ask each other questions? I remember one of the first things we did at Target, even before we had Domo fully on board, is we used a SharePoint conversation room, and it was just called "Where is Data For?" And that's it, right? And it wasn't about here's the expert and here's the asker or whatever. It was just a community of people saying, hey, does anyone know the best way to know if there's a Starbucks in this Target store? And someone would say, well, if you have access to this table, it's here. And then maybe someone from like the core data team would say, oh yeah, you know what, it is there, but this is a better spot, or we should make sure we add that to the core table when it's ready. So it's just creating that conversation in that space to sort of unearth where the value of data is, I think can be really important.
Kelsey, how about you from an organizational perspective? What does your data governance program look like? You're on mute, Kelsey, somehow or other.
There you go.
Okay, I didn't even think I had control over that.
Yeah. And your video is freezing up too a little bit, but we won't hold that against
you. Just winning all around right now.
Yeah.
So like I've alluded to in the past, of this conversation is we're at the very beginning of our journey. So really it's me trying to get everyone on board and understanding the importance of data governance this year and trying to get the naming conventions, the definitions under control, our data sets under control. So really it's just me and a couple of people that believe in it at this point. And then we have a couple of people on different teams as well that are kind of leading it for their systems. So partnering with them heavily to understand how they've gone on their journey and where they are and how do we get there, and any mistakes they've made, we're learning from those or making them ourselves and correcting them.
So no one full-time on data governance as yet?
Nope, no one full-time data governance yet.
You foresee that happening at some point?
Probably after this conversation, I have a feeling there might. I have a feeling I might know who it is too, which is this gal.
Great. All right. So we've discussed some techniques, before and after picture. if you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently? What lessons have you learned in your data governance journeys? Maybe Dave, you can start
Wow.
on that one.
I got a real good one for you. So we talked about the data quality. We talked about making sure you error checked everything. So go back to the beginnings of times, and I'd rather put this in place first. Never connect your source data sets to any of your production data flows. What you want to do is you want to have a layer, an input layer, to where your source data sets come into, we call them enhancement flows. You're going to take that source data and you're going to do any kind of global enhancements, validity checks, error checks, alerts, just all of the quality checks and history of that source data right at the beginning. And when it's finished, then you want to publish it as this is the set of data that's usable from source ABC. And then that's what feeds into all of your actual flows that people are using to publish cards and dashboards. And that way, when your source data, the fields change, you import a new set, you merge another division in or something like that, and there's a major change, you have one location that you can go visit for all of your global manipulations of that source. You have one place where you can say, my validity checks here are good, therefore I trust everything downstream. So put that layer of protection between your sources and your flows. Some of our earlier input sources are going to 17 different areas. And when that data set breaks, okay, great, we have to go fix it. Well, you only fixed it in 13 of the 17 places. So 4 of them are still showing up as incorrect data or the flows are broken. So that's a huge, go back to the beginning lessons learned, put that layer of protection between your sources and your flows. And that's where you centralize all of your validity, your error checking, and your major manipulations of that source material.
So Dave, we had a question from someone in the audience, and I think you answered it, although they're saying, what tools and techniques do you use to prevent multiple analysts or engineers and data scientists from pushing multiple copies of data from the same source? So he says, for example, we have 12 sales data sets in Domo right now. I think you answered that.
Yeah. So one of the things we've been trying to do is we've been experimenting with the certification ability in Domo. So our goal is, and again, journey, we're not there. We recognize that, and our solution for that is we've been testing all of the certification processes. So while you can have now owners and co-owners of data sets, we have a certain number of people who can really get into all the data sets, and that's in the controls and access that Ben is focusing on. But you get to the point to where when you actually have a true set, you want to certify that as the one that everyone is supposed to use. And then you find every other instance on the lineage of where that old data set used to go, and you swap them all out. And then you start killing the older versions because you have a certified set. The issue is you have to make sure that certified set covers everything that everyone is using that data set for. Again, go back to the centralized source and make sure it covers all stakeholders, and then you can use it in a single place.
Yeah, that's great. I have found with clients that attaching a little watermark or seal to those certified reports creates a whole new culture in the organization, a culture of governance. And if you don't go through the process, you don't get your report that you worked on or your data set, out there in the public. And so it gives people a lot of incentive, as we talked about earlier. What are incentives? Mm-hmm. I think the watermark or certification is a huge incentive for people to adhere to the data governance process.
Yeah.
Kelsey, how about you? Any lessons learned? I actually love that watermark idea, so I'm definitely going to steal that. So my only thing is really start from the beginning. One thing I wish I did, I got so excited about everything that Domo could do and do it so quickly that I really didn't implement as much data governance as I should have right from the very beginning. And I don't care where you start, right? I started with definitions and naming conventions, but it's data access, data quality, whatever place you decide to pick, just start from the beginning. It's just clawing your way back is much more difficult than trying to piecemeal it together as you go. So that would be a really big thing. Data governance is critical. Pick a place that's most critical to your company when you kick this off and just start and just keep after it.
Terrific. Ben, how about you? Any lessons learned?
Yeah, no, a number of things. I will just, in my Domo hat here, looking at the questions, I will call out, I know a lot of people are asking questions about certifications or ideas about how to enhancements, you're more than welcome to email me, ben.shine@domo.com. I think one of the lessons I've learned being on the product side is that governance can be tricky because it crosses lots of different products at Domo, right? We have product owners and backlogs and all those things and sprints. And so I've been doing a lot of work, and collectively as a team, we've been trying to think about, like, because inherently it's about weaving those different product functions, whether it's cards or data flows or whatever, together to enable your organization. And so that's something that is not always simple, and there's always ways we can improve how those things connect, or one small missing feature. So please feel free to reach out. I think two big lessons for me. One is around this idea of sort of balancing innovation and governance or alignment, right? I think Jacob asked a question about this, and often I think we do frame it as like they're competing. And I'm personally, and maybe if I took off my background, you would see this, I'm not a governed person. I think messily. I like to play with data. I like to innovate with data. I like to try new things, sometimes break things. And I think as I've gotten older and maybe added some gray hairs here to the beard, I've learned that if I want to be that way, if you want to have innovation, I need governance even more than someone who has that personality, right? Because that's what lets me be innovative. And so I think that's a big piece of it. I think the other thing that I've learned a lot over the years is understanding that, there's different learning styles and different people process data in different ways, right? And I think often Domo, like I often use this analogy of, maybe in sort of, or maybe if you think about modern BI, right? It's the difference between searching for a needle in a haystack and having a big pile of needles. And that's great to have the needles here and have lots of different options, but you need to know how to sort it and organize it. And for some people, again, like personality and different things, like having a pile of needles is worse than searching for a needle in a haystack, right? So you have to understand how different personalities, learning styles, all these things interact in that, right? So it's not just about these functions, it's about culture and people, and fear of change and all those things. And so that's a much more complicated, gnarly problem to solve. But I think if you don't address that underbelly of people and change, doesn't matter how great the tool is, and all the ideas in there are great for Domo or any other tool, but you need to get after that as well.
There's one question about can you hover over a data element and see its definition and owners? So that brings up the whole topic of metadata or business metadata, right? As a way to engender trust in the data among business users. And it gets back to what Dave said at the outset about data quality. Do you guys all have some kind of a metadata store where you define everything and document it and keep it up to date, most importantly, and have consensus about what things mean, and then give users instant access to that?
That has been on the to-do list since we started data. So it literally, we need to define A, B, C, get it documented and published. And right now, like I said, victim of our own success, are so busy we haven't gotten to that. Recognize the need? Absolutely. How to implement it using descriptions. You got row descriptions, variable descriptions, card descriptions, page descriptions, and then we actually have the activity log, which lets you search all that stuff, what's going on with it, and the page and metadata about the instance. So we know how to do it. We haven't had the time to do it. But again, critical item.
Yep, I agree with Dave there. We do use the card descriptions quite heavily. I'll put description of how we calculated whatever that metric is showing in that card there, but like having that visibility when you hover over that card, at least it's there. We have our definitions stored on our internal wiki site, but it's not a holy grail. It's not where we want it to be. It's not everyone's aligned on these definitions, but at least we have started that piece of documenting some of the definitions and how to calculate that and what it should be called if you do roll it out.
So Kelsey, do you have a process for defining things? Who you bring in, who writes the definition, how do you get consensus on it? Do you even vote? I know some of these governance frameworks, they have voting and things like that. How do you go about defining things?
Right now, I just send an email to the other people on the analytics team, and I'm like, this is how I calculated it. Does anyone else have a better way, or has anyone else done this before? It's just a chat, right? It's an open conversation with your team of how they've done it in the past because you want to align with them and make sure you are all aligned. But we really haven't come across one where we've all disagreed and had to figure out what is that consensus of what it is. It's more of a naming the new metric if it is different. to align with the new metric and everything like that. But really, it's just open conversation with the team to figure out if anyone's done it before so that you can replicate that if you do do it.
Do you ever have to bring in, or do you foresee a time when you'd have to bring in an executive to make a decision? This is how we calculate net margin, or something like that.
I mean, dreams do come true, Wayne. Dreams do come true.
I was going to say, I think it's usually whichever calculation makes me look good is where they.
Yeah.
That's the one I want, right?
Yeah.
Hey, Kelsey, that one doesn't look so great. Can we change it out?
Well, I had one customer and we were trying to define KPIs for the entire company. And, they came up with like 60, 70 KPIs. And I said, well, we got to narrow that down. But even just defining, what is a customer ended up being a day-long discussion. What's an active customer? What's an inactive customer? That became very political in some ways, right? Because you couldn't calculate sales really or margins until you knew what you were defining as customers. So I'm wondering if you run into those kinds of nuances.
We haven't yet, but we're still so new at this. I'm hoping it comes down the pike soon. So that way it does force us to kind of implement the rest of those definitions, right? The naming conventions definitions, KPI definitions, the calculations behind all of those, really aligning on what those definitions are so that as a company, when I say customer, I understand what you're talking about or any other kind of terminology that's unique to your company.
Great. Okay, so we're coming down to the end here. Last question for me. We'll still see if we can take some questions from the audience. But what's next? What's the future for all of you in your quest for data governance nirvana? Ben, do you want to start us off on that?
Yeah, I mean, so I get started. I've been looking through. I know there's lots of specific questions which we could obviously follow up on from Domo. I think if you listen to the keynotes this morning. We talked a lot about this idea of a data fabric, right? And even alluding to the concept of a data model. And so from a product perspective and my own personal work perspective, we're going to be doing a lot of work internally to think more about sort of that metadata layer that Wayne was talking about, right? How do I think about, there could be so much in Domo, right? All that big pile of needles, how do I group things? How do I provide some definitions of relationship and metric definitions and other things, which some of that lives in different pieces. And a lot of people in the chat have sort of been mentioning that, but a lot of times you need to be able to connect them more easily or make it more visual and accessible to an end user. So that's definitely something I'm excited on from sort of the work side. I think the other place is, again, the more we can automate. So if we can use data science to identify PII or to say how things are related or identify potential duplicate data sets or those kinds of things, the more you can automate that, the more it can then bubble up which conversations you could have and you can be more effective in what you're going after and not just try to constantly be looking for what might be off.
Okay, who's next here? Kelsey?
Yeah. I think probably next for us would be cleaning up old data sets, making sure that the ones we're not using aren't in there anymore so that when a new person onboards, it's very clear based on the naming convention and what's available, what you can use and what you should use and what it's used for. And then maybe the watermark, I mean, that's pretty cool. So maybe we'll start implementing that idea. Who would have thought as a panelist, I'd definitely take more home than most people here.
Yeah, there was a comment about the watermark in Domo. I think you probably saw that, Ben. And this is an issue, what if the report changes? Does it still have the watermark on? Well, no, it shouldn't, right?
And it's supposed to, that's what someone was saying. It's a bug that they find because the certification should have a watermark or like it has a little,
has a little ribbon
badge. I think very early on in Domo, there was some color coding that we did of cards based upon like, is the data refreshed? But then it got confusing because then some things were not supposed to be refreshed. It hasn't been a core part of that visual interface. But I think, continuing to find ways that, that can be a living thing, right? Because as soon as it gets stale, as soon as people say, oh yeah, I know it doesn't have the watermark, but that's the only place to get it. So just use it and it'll be okay. Then it becomes meaningless, right? Because people don't do it. So it needs to be operationalized. And so we just certainly if there's a bug or something, we'll figure that out and make sure that's working right for that person in Domo. But I think overall the big thing I hear from all of us, right, is this is a journey. It's a process, and you're gonna
Mhm.
you're gonna be better in some ways tomorrow. You might be worse in other
yeah.
ways, and if you think you're done, then you're probably aren't doing it right.
Yeah. Sometimes the next layer of the onion's not too pretty when you get to it.
Yes, a
But
little rotten.
yeah, that's some of the stuff we were testing with the certification of flows and cards and all that is once somebody touches it. So the data, input data is coming through and the process of the flow is not changed. It's still certified. But if you open it up, touch the version, change the settings, it immediately kills the watermark. So you need to have a flag of how to manage that. Like for us, our path forward is, I think we're over the hump of the convincing the rest of the company that, wait a second, there's something to this data thing. There's information to be had there that's going to make us better. So we're coming to the crest of the convincing everybody that this is meaningful and purposeful. And yes, the data means something. All you got to do is spend the time to make sure it's right. And then you determine how you're going to use it. So for our, where are we heading? We're getting to the point now in some of the stuff we're preparing to tell our executives, all right, it's time to really form the council, appoint the executives, make the rules, and hold people accountable. We're getting ready to start really defining that. So as much improvement as we've done, we don't have a set of official rules yet. Some of the folks were asking, where's this all documented? It's been in the plan. It's been there. We have documented roles and access and training and all that, but we don't have a governance process that's locked down that you go to the council to get approval of changes and connections. That's the step we're at now. So getting to there, we're hoping that opens up, a whole lot more awareness. We do have people who are aware now before they go changing their tools or integrating the next version of XYZ server. They actually are keeping us in the loop on what's going on. So it's been a nice accomplishment.
Yeah, so I think Kelsey and Dave, you've been practicing grassroots governance. And that's
Mhm.
actually a nice way to back into enterprise governance, right? With the formal council and stewards and escalation processes and policies and procedures, which, that's what people tend to react negatively to if they're being called into that and they don't have any of the background that you guys have baked into the system already. So I think you're probably doing it the right way. And we often say that you got to practice governance practically, which means use it to do things that the business is really interested in at the moment. Whether it's implementing a new CRM system or something where governance, everyone understands the need for a consistent set of customer data, right? We need that we use governance to do that. Okay, we can buy into that, and then maybe we'll attend your meeting. So
Yeah.
I think it helps to work from the bottom up when it comes to governance.
Yeah. You say grassroots, I say brute force.
Well, at this point, I would love to thank our panelists for their wonderful insights and participating with us today. And I'd like to also thank the audience for listening in and all of your great questions and comments in the chat. So great. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.